That was all I saw. I didn't see co-host.
Yeah, I have all the power now. Thank you. Dangerous.
Okay. It is dangerous, huh?
Alex, that will mean that you can run the slideshow, and I'll just my slide.
Yes.
I'll just do I'll pick up, but I'm not going to change the slides.
Great. Yep. Just give me the cue when you want me to change them.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we might as well get started. Alex, if you want to move to the next slide, I'm going to start with an overview of Zoom in case there are any questions and of the process. We'd like to ask y'all to keep yourselves muted during the presentation and even consider turning off the video during the presentation to help save some space. If you have questions throughout the presentation, we'd like to ask you to put them in the chat box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And I will monitor the questions and give them to the presenters at the end of each group's presentation. You'd also know that we're recording the webinar now that we figured it out. And so we will be posting that on our website, and BCTV will be posting it as well afterwards. So it's widely available. We do have an evaluation form as well, and I will post a link to that in the chat box. I'll also send the evaluation out after the presentation to all those who registered. So if I missed anyone, please let me know. I've asked the attendees who are on early to put their names in the town that they're with in the chat box, just to introduce themselves to each other so everyone knows who's there. So if you haven't done that, please do that now. And then before I move on, I just wanted to ask if anyone had any specific questions about Zoom. Okay. Well, hopefully it's working for everyone now. I think we're all getting more and more familiar with it as we move on. I'm going to begin with our team introductions. My name is Susan Westa. I am a senior planner and the community development lead with the Windham Regional Commission, and I've been managing this project from our end. Chris Campany, our executive director, wanted me to let you know that he's not playing hooky today, but he was not able to be here because he had a medical appointment with his mother. So he may be able to join us later on. We'll see. The rest of our team consists of our technical experts. With ValleyNet, we have Carol Monroe. They operate EC Fiber, which has become the model for implementing rural broadband in Vermont. And also Alex Kelly from Rural Innovation Strategies, Inc., also known as RISI. And both of these folks have extensive experience working in rural communities to implement broadband fiber and to identify strategies to do that. They've been working not only in Vermont, but throughout the Northeast, as well as other parts of the country. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to introduce our Deerfield Valley Communications Union District leaders. They will be presenting at the end of tonight's webinar. We have with us today our Deerfield CUD Chair, Ann Manwaring. There, she raised her hand, good. We also have Stephen John, who is the Vice Chair, and David Jones, who is the Clerk. Next slide, please. So why are we here? Well, the Windham Regional Commission was aware that there were major internet connectivity issues in certain parts of our region. And in the fall of 2019, the state issued a call for proposals for Broadband Innovation Grant, or BIG as it's become known. It submitted a letter of interest, and they asked us to join the team because they knew that the Windham Regional Commission had relationships with the communities in our region and with all of you folks. So our role has really been about community engagement, and our technical experts have really led the development of the feasibility study that you're going to hear more about today, and they are now getting into the development of the business plan. That will be the next step. Next slide, please. So the overall goal of the project is to provide internet service to the unserved and underserved areas of the Windham region first. And this has really guided all of our work to date. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has really strengthened the awareness of the importance of the issues surrounding connectivity in our region and the need. It's now acceptable and even become the norm for most people to work from home, and the importance of virtual education and healthcare cannot be stressed enough. Both have been functioning virtually really since March, and will continue to do so in some form throughout the next year at least. Next slide, please. For those of you who haven't been involved in the project all along, we held a kickoff meeting in January, an in-person meeting back in the good old days. We had our survey training in February. The survey was a really important component of this feasibility study. An analysis of that survey is available on our website, on our broadband page. If you're interested, take a look at that. And I, again, want to thank all the volunteers who helped with the survey, who helped get the word out about the survey and help folks complete the survey in their communities. Without the volunteers, it wouldn't have been the success it was. And we had over 4,200 responses. So that was really great.
Great.
Was then incorporated into the feasibility study, which now I'm going to turn it over to Alex and Carol to talk about.
Great.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sue. Can everyone hear me? Okay. And by the way, Sue, thank you for your leadership and management of this project. And it's to your credit that we've been able to stay on track on the timeline, even during a pandemic. So it's been really great. So just another quick recap of where we are and where we're going in a kind of visual form. On the left side of the screen, you see the kind of high level elements that contributed to the feasibility study. And we'll go through some of those today and how we built the model that informs the feasibility study. And, you know, cutting to the chase a little bit, we have passed the threshold of having a third-party review and the state of Vermont review the feasibility study. And the good news is they agree with our conclusions that a network in the Windham County region is feasible, and we'll go into what parameters around that network we think have to be in place to make it a success. So right now, as Sue mentioned, we're working on the business plan. There's a few elements on this slide that are incorporated into the business plan, and we hope to have that done in about 2 to 2.5 months. So just as a reminder, the audience for the feasibility study was really the Public Service Department of Vermont. And they were the ones that needed to give us the approval to move on to the next phase and disperse the second half of the grant funding. And they were looking for two things primarily. They wanted to know if the project would be technically feasible, right? Does the region have the infrastructure to make a fiber network successful and work? And would it be financially feasible? You know, could we develop a network that that became cash flow positive after 3 years? And that was the threshold that they were looking at. So the fancy acronym related to this is EBITDA, EBITDA positive, and that means earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization, and that's the kind of threshold they were looking at. But in effect, they called it cash flow positive after 3 years. And then they also wanted to understand, you know, what other considerations would make a network viable or not viable in the region. So, as I mentioned, overall the findings are that a network is feasible. First of all, on the technology side, there are no technological barriers that exist to creating a viable and detailed engineering plan, which will be the next phase in the kind of technical side of this. And we'll get into a little bit more what technical assets the region has that make this technically feasible. And then, as far as the financially feasible side of things, our findings are that the, communication union district will need to aggregate a certain number of what are called passings, which are premises passed, to make it feasible, right? It has to be a certain size to be feasible. And we think that size is about 15,000 E911 addresses. And the other main takeaway that we want to convey right up front is for a network to be feasible, it has to be built in a phased approach that prioritizes the unserved and underserved areas first. And we'll get into why that is, but basically, if you build a network on top of places that already have cable, you're going to have fewer customers adopt that fiber service right away, which will extend greatly your path to being cash flow positive. So by building out to underserved towns first, you're actually able to get more customers faster, thereby meeting the state's requirements of being cash flow positive after 3 years. So I'll just go through a few of the elements that were included in the model that we created. First of all, we used data from the Public Service Department on things like existing broadband, road miles, housing units. We used E911 locations. As all of you know, we put out a robust survey, which was really helpful and really key to a range of things, both understanding, what the demand was, validating other data sets that we might have gotten from the Public Service Department, understanding what kind of bundled packages people are subscribing to, and a whole range of other things. So that was really, really helpful. And thank you again to everyone who participated in that. We also used historical data from the EC Fiber network to calibrate some things in the feasibility model. And we did that because we could compare like to like, in that we could compare a similar region, being most of Orange County, to the Windham region. And the population lined up pretty nicely, and we calibrated data from the EC Fiber network to basically map onto Windham towns as well. So along those lines, EC Fiber has an average revenue per user of 110. That's average across all service tiers, and includes a number of people that also subscribe to voice services as well. So, for our model, we estimated an average revenue per user of 100, 10% less to be safe and give a cushion. And we also expected kind of similar capital costs to what EC Fiber has found. EC Fiber has built out 1,400 miles of fiber. And so, we calibrated construction costs based on what they found in terms of cost per mile in different types of terrain with different types of attachments already on the poles. And there's a whole range of factors that kind of go into that. But we based it on the historical data that EC Fiber had based of what it cost to build out. So as I mentioned, it's really, we found that it was really key to build the unserved areas first. And so right here, we've kind of included the build sequence we used in the model. Now, this is not necessarily the ultimate build sequence, but it is generally what we advocate for the build sequence being. And there are some considerations that might change things a little bit. For example, the engineering might say it's a little easier to build, Whitingham before Reedsboro or something like that. But by and large, and I'll kind of read it out actually in case the screen is small, by and large, we are advocating for the first 5 towns to be built to be Wardsboro, Reedsboro, Whitingham, Halifax, Marlborough, before moving to the partially cabled towns, Windham, Stratton, Townsend, Jamaica, and others. And then towards the end of the build, and this is pending kind of demand, then the network can expand into towns that already are pretty well cabled, at least above 90% cabled, towns like Brattleboro, for example. So the other consideration with this build sequence is that there is a limit to how many miles a year that you can build, unfortunately. So that limit historically for EC Fiber has been about 250 miles per year. That there are constraints on the staff you need to build the build the network. There are constraints on waiting for the owners of the poles to do what's called make-ready work, which is kind of preparing the pole to have another attachment on it. And so, you know, our model assumed that we could build no more than 250 miles per year on average. So I'm going to pass it over to Carol, who's going to talk a little bit about, you know, the financing aspect of the feasibility study.
So Sue, I noticed there are a number of questions coming in. Do we want to address those on this section first and then go on, or do we want to wait to the end? You're muted.
Still muted. There I am. Yeah, no, I agree. That's probably a good idea, if that's okay with you. So Alex, we have one question that says 15,000 E911 addresses or 15,000 unserved E911 locations.
That's a great question. So 15,000, the answer is 15,000 mostly unserved E911 locations. It will be impossible to get to many of these unserved locations without overbuilding places that have cable. So the way that it's set up in the model is that once you get to that many locations, there will be a percentage, there'll be a certain number of those that already have cable. And we factored in the likely customers in that stretch, as well as the likely customers in the unserved parts. So it's not a clean number that you can really say, you know, this many houses passed is the threshold. It really depends on the mix of served and unserved. And based on the particular scenarios that we looked at of the particular towns and how they were set up, we think that it will take 15,000 passings focusing on unserved, but knowing that you're going to pass some served areas to get to that feasible threshold.
Okay. Next question is, why is this a superior approach to the New Hampshire model, which allows towns to put out RFPs to ISPs, get a number, and deliver a municipal bond? Why all the bureaucracy?
So first of all, I can answer part of that, having done quite a bit of work here in New Hampshire as well, is that the state of Vermont does not allow for general obligation bonds, which is what's being used in the state of New Hampshire on a per town basis. The second is if you roll out one town at a time, as they've moved forward with in New Hampshire, but it's a very slow rollout. So this year it's 5 towns. If you do that one town at a time, we'll be doing towns for 50 years. I mean, there's just a lot of unserved territory and unserved towns. So a district approach makes more sense. It also ensures that a town does not get left behind, meaning that on where you put out an RFP and there are responses to it, those will be those companies will be sort of cherry picking those towns where they can make more revenue. Whereas if you bundle all the towns together and aggregate the demand, then even the lowest populated town can get served too.
Great.
So.
Okay, the next question is APRU per what time period?
It's an ARPU per month. So that's average revenue per customer, per unit, per month.
Okay, good. Next question is, will you share the criteria you use to determine which towns are in which phase, and is all the criteria weighted equally?
Generally, the criteria, we can share some of that, but generally the criteria is that the least served towns go first, and those that have partial cable, but a number still of unserved areas go next, and those that are mostly cabled. When I say cabled, I'm talking about cable television cabled, coax cabled, will go last because they're fairly served as it is today.
Okay, another question is, not all cable systems are equal. 12-2, which is the cable system in Dover, Wilmington? Oh, doesn't even meet federal minimum broadband guidelines.
I think that's true. Duncan Cable is doing its best to roll out fiber and replacing much of their system with that to move them up to a DOCSIS, the newest level of operating systems that would allow them to move to higher bandwidth capacity. But they're not there yet, but they will be. They're getting there.
Okay. Another question, will COVID-19 provide any waivers to expedite the build out?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. What it has done is lit a fire under the Vermont legislature, who is talking about additional money that they might make available and how they can accelerate this process. So it is positively impacting, knock on wood, or will positively impact this eventual project, but the legislature hasn't finalized what they're doing yet.
In addition, Velco, which is the transmission distribution electrical utility, and Green Mountain Power have been looking at ways in which they can run fiber at the time they do their own construction, and Velco actually has fiber available for leasing, and they've made it quite clear that they are willing to lease that fiber to CUDs for a very reasonable cost. So those types of changes, meaning they're thinking about Vermont and thinking about the community, will be helpful as you get into a build and maybe lessen some of the costs.
Okay, 662 cable miles at 250 per year equals 2.5 years, question mark.
I'm not sure where they get, okay, so the cabled miles that you see on the slide is cable television miles, not cable fiber miles. So the mileage that we're looking at for total road miles is 1381. And you'll have to go, you won't have to build some of those cabled miles, but you will have to build part of them, because in many of the towns that have a cable product, it goes down the center of town or up the main road and often doesn't branch out left and right, and certainly not out to the dirt roads in Vermont. And so the rural areas are often off of a cabled area and would have to build through that cabled area to get there.
All right. I think I'll take 2 more questions at this point and then maybe move on, just because we want to make sure we get through everything, but we can do more questions at the end. So let's see. The next one is, if all Vermont CUDs and other rural towns in New England want to build at the same due to the government money available, will 250 miles per year be possible? Can GMP put this much make ready done?
It's very much a concern. It's a concern we voiced to the Department of Public Service, and it's a concern we've talked about in terms of where the CARES funding should be allocated. But we definitely will need more line personnel to do make-ready work in the state, whether it's contracted or whether it belongs to one of the companies like Green Mountain Power or Consolidated or any one of those companies, in order to build out all of these CUDs. In the previous version of the CARES funding, we requested some workforce development funds that would be used for incentives to attract people to Vermont to do some of this work, and also some funds to do some training here in Vermont. They've taken, there are some things they thought weren't really, might not be eligible under CARES, and they've put them on as phase 2, and looking for funding to fund those in initiatives, because it's absolutely true. We need more in this state to be able to get all of these CUDs up and running in a fairly good time period.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one more question. Has there been pushback from cable providers or competing proposals from them, especially in areas with 40 to 70% existing service? Numbers off the top of my head.
We've not put out an RFP for delivering service in this area, in these areas at this time. So in that in that sense, we don't have competing proposals. We'll complete the business plan. We do encourage some of the smaller cable providers to think about what they could do to move this forward and to be part of the solution. And so we're happy to hear from them regarding that. Sometimes the smaller cable providers or the smaller ISPs make pretty good operators, but there's certainly room for them to participate in this endeavor.
Okay, and with that, Carol, I think if you want to move on with the rest of your presentation.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the goal of being that we be EBITDA or cash flow positive after year 3. And when we work the numbers, what we're discovering is that's not feasible with just the initial investment of 4.4 million, and that comes from the VITA loans that are available, plus the match to those. So 4 million in VITA loans, 400,000 in match. And we would need to go out and get some additional subordinated debt. And that's very similar to what EC Fiber experienced as well. And so with that in mind, with that limited investment of 4 million plus the 10% match, we think we can reach that threshold in 4 to 5 years. And so that's the numbers regarding the slow rollout with that initial investment, which sort of says, let's go forward. We can make that number, but not in 3 years. 3 years is pretty tough, because in 3 years you'd build 750 miles, and that's probably not enough. So a fast rollout would allow you with some additional subordinated debt, and we have been looking at sources for that. We'll continue that approach through the business planning to locate some subordinated debt. Would allow us to reach that level within 2 to 3 years. There's always the issue about whether we can build more than 250 miles a year with the current status quo in Vermont, which is that the utilities probably can't do make ready for 250 miles for each CUD, is pushing it to the limit. They've had difficulty meeting the EC Fiber needs at 250 miles, and they don't have five or six CUDs all doing the same thing. So we know that that's a struggle for make ready work, unless there's unless they subsidize it in some way. We do know they changed the make ready last year to allow for one-touch make ready, which allows the contractor to do the make ready work themselves instead of waiting on the utility. That only applies to the telecom space, but it might shorten up some of the timelines. But that is the longest period of time in which frankly, you feel like you have no control because you can't get on the poles until that make-ready work is complete. There are a number of other things we've outlined in the feasibility study that could be risky. Things like ordering fiber at the same time. Everyone in this country is ordering fiber, but certainly everyone in Vermont will be ordering fiber. And so making sure that comes in on time. Most of the electronics come from China. That relationship isn't all that stable right now, so we don't want any delays in that process either. So there are some other risks associated with it, but the real, from a timeline perspective, it really has to do with that ability to do make-ready work. So we put in 2 scenarios in this feasibility study. Next slide. So the sources of financing, this is some of what we know, but that VITA has $4 million loans that require a 10% match. That's another 400,000 for this purpose. The purpose of that loan is to be able to bring a communication union district to a certain level to be able to attract investment from the municipal revenue bond market, and then pay back that loan so it can be loaned out to somebody else. And the next would be subordinated debt, which would be subordinated debt to the VITA financing. which will be at a higher interest rate, but it will be necessary if we're going to build faster for that fast rollout scenario. Following that, for long-term financing, we're really looking at the municipal revenue bond market. Those bonds usually go out about 20 years. EC Fibers issued about 42 million of these bonds as of December of 2019. But by state law, CUDs do not have taxation authority and therefore cannot do general obligation bonds in the state of Vermont. So these are some of the additional requirements. Finding a suitable operator, which is an internet service provider that will meet the needs of the CUD and be the operator. I have to. I'm sorry, but my screen is cut off because I have things on both sides of it. So, yeah, and a structure. And then structure a contract that meets those needs. So really what you want is an operator that already is doing some of the types of things necessary for this network. Perhaps an operator that has bucket trucks and line crews who can string fiber and splice fiber. Or an operator if they don't need to be able to do that specifically, an operator that already has some type of customer. So sometimes we look at ISPs, look at small electrical companies, municipal electrical companies, and smaller cable companies where they already have some business software systems and operating systems in place, and they already have a help desk and so on, and can serve customers appropriately. So somebody that's already set up to do this. Building it from scratch as ValleyNet did, is a very difficult process. Attracting the right talent to Vermont to monitor your network and to run your network, and then all the capital assets needed to set up an operation, including those bucket trucks, among other things. And so it's best if we can find an operator that has that equipment already. We're looking at a 30% penetration. That means a 30% take rate in those unserved areas. That is generally that first year as you start rolling out, it's 20, and then it quickly goes to 30% and higher, and an average revenue per user of $100. So EC Fiber's average revenue is 110. We're saying 100. That's based on their ability to take a service for both internet and phone. That's what makes up the average revenue.
Carol, I would just like to interrupt for 1 minute and ask everyone to please mute yourself if you're not speaking. There's some background noise, and some folks are having trouble hearing with that background noise. So thank you. Go ahead.
So that average revenue per user really is across all of the services. So if you, in the case of EC Fiber, they have 4 tiers and a phone service, and depending upon what tiers people take, the basic service, the standard service, and so on, that averages out to be $110 a month per user. Then the aggregation of 15,000 plus, mostly unserved E911 addresses, as we talked about before. We use E911 addresses because our modeling is based on E911 addresses. And so in some cases, you'll see there's a number for public service department addresses. What they've done is they've taken the 911 addresses and removed all the things like cemeteries and trailheads and so on that probably won't take service. But because our model already takes that into effect, that we don't remove those at that time because we've been using this in the modeling. We could use the other and then just change the model, but that's where we are, is 15,000 plus, mostly unserved E911 addresses. Continued regional cooperation in managing the CUD, and a pre-subscription campaign. Both are very important as we go forward. Communication union districts are really all about the community. They're about serving everyone in your community, businesses and residential alike, to the end of the road, and making sure everybody gets service, the same type of service, the same level of service available to them, universal access. And that comes from regional cooperation within your towns and your region, and with your support. Pre-subscription campaign. What this is individuals who actually sign up and say, yes, I want service. As soon as you get here, I will take service. It's an important milestone to not only determine where to build first, but also in determining the long range planning for revenue bonds. They like to know that you have customers in the pipeline, and that's one of the ways to show that. Securing the loan from VITA and a substantial amount of subordinated debt, really to make this move faster. And so, yes, we have to be able to prove that we can pay back our VITA loan, and also to attract outside debt. But we also need to find the $400,000 to match that VITA loan. And that can come in the way of grants from other entities like Northern Borders or other economic development groups, or it can come from private investment. And both of those are possible. And then 6 is transitioning to long-term financing, such as municipal revenue bonds after 4 or 5 years, when you can show stability and you can show that you can pay back the debt that you already have. So you're showing a regular payment back, EBITDA and cash flow positive, 3 years of audited financials. Those are all requirements for revenue bonds. But the revenue bond market has been very powerful, and the EC fiber bonds sell out within 2 or 3 days. There are all sorts of insurance companies and banks and so on who purchase those bonds, institutional investors. And because they're municipal bonds in the state of Vermont, they're tax-free from a federal basis as well as a state of Vermont tax-free basis. And so there's once they hit the market, I think that it's been proven that they will sell. And to put a little bit of fine point on that, EC fiber bonds are not rated at this point in time. They didn't have the ability to be rated initially. They're not rated today. And we think that in the next go around, we probably will go out and ask for an investment rating on the bonds. An investment rating will start to reduce the interest that we have to pay to sell the bonds. And then no substantial inflation of construction costs or materials. I'm very concerned about this. There's a lot of money flowing around right now through the CARES Act, but also as you look at what's coming up through the House and Senate in terms of possible infrastructure money, funds that will be distributed to the states for this purpose. That puts pressure on the materials as well as the cost of construction. There'll be a lot of competition for the resources that already exist today, which is why I really think that the state needs to focus on workforce development and get people trained and ready to go. We talked a little bit about this already. Characteristics of a suitable operator. Exists as a business entity today, experience at a utility or a telecom or something similar, ability to leverage their current assets or their systems and experience, meaning their customer service systems, their systems, their construction systems, executive leadership, and so on, and have a business structure, accounting experience, and compliance acumen, and a motivation to secure flexible and disparate funding, and willing to do that. This really works best with an organization that puts the community first. So whether that's a not-for-profit or a B corporation or something similar, even a smaller ISP who's always put their community first, a smaller cable company puts their community first, that's the type of operator that works best. yeah, we have found it difficult to work with operators that are in the for-profit world of with the very large companies that have to explain their actions to their shareholders. So they seem to be less willing to do this work for a reasonable cost. So what makes an attractive potential operator? Sufficient scale to be so that to the operator. So you have to have sufficient scale so that you're profitable. It's a profitable opportunity. It has to be adequately financed. You're not going to find an operator who's going to finance the entire network. Be willing to commit to multi-year, probably at least 5 arrangements exclusively. There's a lot of discussion about open access networks, not so much recently, but in the residential world, open access networks don't attract a lot of operators because there's just not in the rural areas, because there's just not enough opportunity for them. So when it says exclusive, that's really what we're trying to do. And then a robust pre-subscription campaign for services, and be realistic about the amount of control it will exert on day-to-day operations. So be an operator, you need to be realistic about really what it's going to entail. Pre-subscription campaign. So EC Fiber did this when it made a commitment to build out 250 miles. When it went out for the first revenue bond offering, it did what they called a crowd fiber campaign, and they determined where there was the most interest. And those first 6 towns that were built completely, these are the towns that were built border to border, were chosen as a result of this pre-subscription campaign. And the pre-subscription campaign, it's a mouthful, and their need, in other words, how unserved they were, and what it would cost to get to that area of the region. But this actually is a very good way of showing what kinds of service that people are willing to sign up for, at what level of service, basic or standard or gigabit, it doesn't require a deposit. It just needs to have enough people interested in moving it forward. It allows the fiber build crews to hook up houses as they pass, meaning if you're building out an area and you know that the houses along the route are willing and able and have signed up for service, then the construction crews can actually run that drop to the house as they go by. It saves a lot of time in the long run, rather than doing one drop to a house on Main Street and another one on across town, or even in a different town. It's best to do them as they go, and it makes it go by a lot faster. The results of the campaign show the strong numbers that make it easier to secure loans and grants, because you can show that you have a backlog of people who are interested to get on the network. And our experience at EC Fiber has been that 85% of those that sign up in a pre-subscription campaign actually do become customers. So that's it's a real number. Even when they sign up in 2017 and they get service in 2020. So even though they signed up 3 years ago, they still want this service, and frankly, there's not a lot of options. But they still want their service, and they wait patiently when it comes to them. We can begin that at any time, that pre-subscription campaign. So the feasibility study was reviewed by a third party. The third party we chose was Municipal Capital Markets, which is the company that we work with for our revenue bonds. And so they look at it not only for revenue bonds, but also for investment opportunities at all levels. And they have agreed that the project is feasible. And of course, the Public Service Department did as well. We have a lot of next steps. We have to create a business plan. including market analysis, high-level engineering, risk management, construction costs, in a time that's very fluid. There's a lot of things happening today that weren't happening 6 months ago. There's funding from the FCC in something called, you'll hear the term RDOF, but it's Rural Development Opportunity Funds from the FCC. They've chosen census blocks they think are unserved, and they've redefined that to be 25-3. So these are census blocks that don't get 25-3 internet services. It's very different than what it's been in the past. The level in the past has been 10-1. Funds were available for any entity that didn't deliver 10-1, and now it's 25-3. So all the DSL customers out there that have ADSL now are qualified. So it's a very large dollar amount, and that's coming. There are USDA Reconnect funds. The way that affects Vermont is that in the USDA, most of Vermont is not eligible for USDA funds because of the funds that were attributed to the wireless mesh network that was built as part of the stimulus package in the past by VTEL, which works well in some areas and not so well in most areas. Yet, because they received USDA funds in the past, they're eligible for this second round of Reconnect funds. And it's my understanding that VTEL has requested Reconnect funds. I don't know that they will be awarded, but that's something we need to keep track of. The state has these CARES funds, COVID-19 funds that have been awarded to the state. There will be some funds that come out of that to do line extensions, meaning if you already have a network and you need to extend it a little bit further down the road to cover some houses, there will be funds to do that. And so we need to understand who's going to be doing those line extensions and in what areas. It may affect some of the areas that we have on our list as part of this project. And then the last is a complete unknown, is what is the federal government going to do for their infrastructure stimulus packages that they keep talking about, but I think they're still in the House and the Senate, and I don't think they've moved very far, but broadband is certainly one of those areas that they will look to fund. So in that aspect, the very last one, we want to make sure that these projects are ready and able to take advantage of any infrastructure funds that come down.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Carol, I'm truly sorry to interrupt, but I think your papers may be too close to your mic or something. We're having a really hard time hearing your wonderful content because I think if you're handling papers, I think it's close to your microphone, which is picking up your handling the papers. Is what I'm wondering.
So I don't have any papers. Can you hear me?
We can, but there's some kind of background noise that everyone else seems to be muted, so we're just assuming it may be coming somehow from your mic, but perhaps that's incorrect.
Could be a squeaky chair too.
Yeah.
Sorry, Carol.
Right. Maybe if I move it closer to me, it's my computer mic, so it's not.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
That's great.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
I'm sorry that I didn't notice that it.
Oh, how could you? You're delivering great content, so how could you?
So, but thanks for interrupting.
Yes, sorry about that.
So anyway, and to look at potential vendors and operators, and to continue assisting Deerfield Valley CUD, which is really the CUD that we've recommended in this feasibility study, advising them on funding opportunities and organizational and governance discussions, and we'll continue to do that as well.
Okay.
Is that it, Alex?
Great. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Should we look at the questions for this section?
Ready for some more questions? All right. You had just mentioned the CARES Act funding, 43 million. Somebody noted that. If that funding is available to pay for loan, then what okay, let's see. What will the 43 million for the CARES Act then pay for if loans are being sought for this project? Can you explain how this work intersects with the discussions of the broadband efforts outlined in the CARES Act?
So at the state of Vermont, it's been a very interesting week. If you were listening to the Finance Committee and the Appropriations Committee, they have recommended 43,800,000 of which to go to CUDs for startup costs primarily, so consultant costs, attorney fees, insurance fees, those types of things. It's roughly about 100,000 per CUD. That's not clearly enough money to be your match funding for VITA. The state is looking for other sources for match funding for the CUDs to assist in that process too. The CARES Act covers a number of other things, but the real concern about the CARES Act is that it has to deliver on that promise by December of this year. So it's very difficult to do construction. It's impossible to do make-ready work in this 6-month period of time, and then construction and actually turn up systems that can deliver 25.3. So most of the funding is not being allocated for things that we had recommended, which would be poll collection activities, poll make-ready work and applications, design and engineering to a very detailed level. So everything is construction ready by the new year. Evidently, those items are not, they don't consider those to be CARES Act eligible. However, as I said, they sort of put them in on a list so that they can find funding for those activities is what we're looking at, or if there's infrastructure funds coming from the federal government and use them for that purpose.
Okay, another question is, what is a fairly good time period? Comcast has a market cap of 176 billion. Why not pull their corporate charter to do business in the state? Comcast
is very much dependent upon what they can do for their shareholders. And so they have, their policies have always said, we'll build where we can have a return on investment that makes sense to us. And that requires a certain number of households per mile. And most of these rural areas that we're talking about don't fall into that category of X number. It's usually about 20 houses per mile or 25. So they've not ever been interested in rolling out a network to areas that don't meet that qualification, and they have to. They're clearly responsible to their shareholders, and that's the sort of the level that they've drawn a line.
Okay, can you summarize the take rate parameters used in the modeling?
Yeah. We start off the first year. You have to remember customers are coming on gradually, and so you don't get a first full year, 12 months of the number of customers you might get in that first year. And so the take rates look low in that first year. They quickly increase in the unserved areas, in the areas that do not have a cable plant, to about 30%, and then they grow year after year after that. One of the towns within EC Fiber is at a 60% take rate. That happens to be Barnard, and others are moving up fairly quickly as we go through this COVID-19 dilemma where everybody's trying to work from home, educate their children from home, and do telemedicine. So I think that's moving very quickly up from there. We allow a much lower take rate in the cabled areas. As much as people don't seem to like their cable provider, somehow they find it difficult to pull that plug. And sometimes it's because they can't give up that remote control on the television. That would be my household, but in other times they're just happy with what they have. So the take rate in a cabled area is very low. We look at it at about 17%. Our experience with it is that when you go through an area that's cabled, but it's also a small business area, because the CUDs can offer more reasonable rates without long-term contracts. Often they can pick up a lot of small businesses that don't need a cable product. They just need high-speed internet that's reliable and affordable. And that we've seen in our Woodstock build as well as our Norwich build, where we've gone through considerable cabled areas to get to the unserved.
Okay. Someone else asked if I am a Dunkin' customer, but I'm not able to get fiber from them and my street is not even on their planning map. How long will it take to get fiber?
So we are planning, as we look at those primarily 2 towns that have Dunkin' cable, we're just really planning to hit the areas that are unserved. And so if that happens to be that area that you're speaking about, it will be in our plans to roll out fiber to that area. If Dunkin' Cable manages to do that ahead of time and first, then we'll find another solution. I mean, but ultimately, we're not opposed to building over cable. It's just that in the initial stages of a project, those first several years, it doesn't make financial sense to do that with a 17% take rate and a more expensive construction cost.
Okay, and I'm just going to go through a couple more before we have the CUD present. So have you considered that some pole routes are overland through wooded areas?
No. Yes. I mean, I'm not saying it's a silly question. It's a great question, and it's difficult in Vermont. There are a lot of poles that are in the easement through wooded areas, over hill, over dale. It is GMP's directive to move all that eventually, over time, a long period of time, to the roadside, because it's very difficult to maintain them. Your power goes out and it's in somebody's back field, or in one situation with EC Fiber, we had issues 2 years in a row because the cow ate the fiber. So the fiber came down the pole and went into conduit and then in the middle of their meadow. And I don't know what it is about fiber, but they liked it. Yes, it's difficult, but we know that exists and we'll continue to work through that. What's even more difficult is finding individuals that will do the pole collection work, because they literally have to go to every single pole, no matter where it is. And often they underestimate what that's like in Vermont. So we will be looking for people who like to be outside, who like to hike, who don't mind the briar bushes, and are equipped to do it and come equipped to do it. Because sometimes when you bring in people from out of state, they just have no idea. So it's a real challenge.
Okay, one more question here. What interest rate are the EC Fiber bonds paying?
They vary. So although the issuance is up to 23 or 24 years, there are some bonds within that issuance that are 3 or 5 year bonds, and there are some that are 23-year bonds, so that they're kind of a staggered mix of bonds, depending upon who's purchasing the bonds. But in general, it's been about 5%. A little higher here, a little lower there. Sometimes I think the last one was well under 5%, but not like what you can get if you were to get a USDA loan, which would be like 3%, right? So that's something to consider. And because we're EC Fiber is unrated, so we pay a little bit more money on the market.
Okay, thank you, Carol and Alex, both. Maybe we could take a couple more questions at the end, but I don't want to miss out on the Deerfield Valley CUD's presentation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ann, Stephen, and David.
Can you see me? Hello.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Okay, hi. Hello,
Hi,
so I'm
everybody.
Stephen John, and Ann is here. Where's Ann? I don't see her, but David is showing. Wave your hand.
Ann's there.
You are. Yeah.
Ann's
Good.
waving.
So on the screen, you'll see really the opening page for dvfiber.org. And maybe that term isn't familiar with you, but that is how far we've gotten with this 13 towns collaborating and joining to make this effort to reach the served and underserved with fiber, high-speed fiber. So this just gives you an idea. If you go to that website, this is what you'll see. This happens to be the Marlborough Meeting House, a very resplendent building, as you can see. So this DV Fiber is actually now the trade name that we have registered, because we have to be able to do contracted business in the future. And we have to have that identity. So there have been a number of things done already. Before going into those, I want to remind us all why we're here. Those towns that have decided to join certainly recognize that we got a lot of work to do. And it's not going to happen by a few, very steady volunteers. It takes a lot of hands, and it will take certainly some professional work on a contracted basis and consulting to really reach the goals that we seek, that is universal access for everyone. And also, regardless of their economic means. We have to be able to reduce the divide, the internet divide, let us put it that way, in our society, and certainly in Vermont. So we all realize, I've been on the committee for 15 years or so, or connected with this project in Marlborough, and there are many of you around the county and Windham region that have been working at this a long time and thought it was very important, but we haven't been able to get too far because we've been hoping and waiting for a private enterprise to find us attractive enough. And, we're facing the reality when we look in the mirror, we're not that attractive financially. We got not enough people on the roads and not enough takers. So it has to be either a public investment or a public-private partnership that makes this work. And that's what we have to figure out together. We hope that we own it. We hope that a municipal entity, the CUD, Communications Union District, owns or at least controls and contracts for the service, the ISP, for the building, construction, and so forth, perhaps in a public-private partnership to get sufficient funds, but ideally have as much control over maintaining this infrastructure as a neutral connection for all of our work, pleasure, and education, as well as medical needs. The key component is that this organization puts the communities, the town's best interests at the heart of the project. And I think with that, I want to welcome any other town on behalf of the board of the DVCUD. Realize we only just organized on April 9th was our first meeting. But we do have a very strong board, and we have some really fine representatives from all 13 towns to date. And some of them are around the room, if we call this a room. I just appreciate very much their hard work. And we also have alternates. So many of you contemplating urging your towns to join certainly should step up to provide that kind of leadership and representation from your town. And we request a representative appointed by your select board, as well as 2 alternates. And I think that will enable us to have many more resources and different kinds of expertise contributing to this this task, which has a long road to hoe, but we, I think, as Vermonters, can pull it together and get it to happen. Enough of my inspirational speech. I do want to open up to questions and welcome your interest.
Okay, are there any questions for the Deerfield Valley CUD? They've done a great job getting up and running. As Stephen mentioned, they have 13 members already. And here's a question: can other towns join?
Yes, you may, and I hope you will. It takes a recognition that it really serves a purpose for your town and your constituents, your citizens and residents in town, both seasonal and permanent residents. And so, for example, Brattleboro is the largest town in terms of population, and certainly has the smallest number of people who are unserved, underserved. But their select board certainly saw the merits of making sure that everyone is connected. And of course, as you can see from the presentation of the feasibility study, and probably we anticipate will be similar in the business plan, those neighborhoods of Brattleboro that are closest or connected to other member towns that are, going to be built out first because they have great unmet need. For example, Marlboro is on the winning list of losers in the state, along with Halifax, so we think that it's possible that depending on the engineering and design study, it would be very efficient to include some of these peripheral areas of the towns that are served very well by cable at this point. They only have to do 2 things. You have to have the select board vote to join at a select board meeting, legally warned meeting. That'd be for that special purpose, just on their agenda. And then the select board has to appoint a representative and 2 alternates. And David Jones, the clerk, certainly can supply the motion if you need to have the language. It's not too fancy though. You just want to join the Deerfield Valley Communications Union District and request to do so. Then the board, the members that are already members of the towns that are already members of the Communications Union District, each of their 1 representative, 1 town, 1 rep, that's how it votes. And they consider accepting new towns. And so far we've unanimously accepted everybody. And I hope we continue that tradition. So welcome.
So they're ready to join. Whoop. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, other questions?
Yes. The next question is from Londonderry, who says they're ready to join, but they're having a terrible time getting volunteers for anything.
Yeah. Well, that, it is in these, in our small towns, it always seems like there are just a few people that are, carrying the load and willing to step forward. It does take some courage, but look, none of us know all that much about internet. I mean, it's not like you got to have some background in this. You got to have a willingness to make it work and think about what is the best path. The more heads we have combining together, the wiser our decisions will be. In isolation, we can't succeed.
Absolutely. We have some folks from Guilford on the call who are looking for an update from Guilford, and then somebody responded saying that there will be an article in the next Gazette, and the question was raised, will Guilford be joining?
Well, Guilford actually has. Zahn is, you want to speak up, Zahn? You're our representative, Guilford. Zahn Estes.
This is Zahn Eastis from Guilford. I don't mean to take the microphone, but since the question has come up, yes, the select board voted unanimously in May to join this CUD, and I attended my first meeting last week. So thank you.
And Zahn voted.
And we're glad to
Great.
have them.
Yeah, there is, just for your information, there is one other town that already has asked, contacted me about joining, and they plan to vote. That's Vernon, plans to vote or consider the issue and presumably vote positively on July 7th, I think is that meeting. I'll be at that meeting. I'm willing to attend any meetings with any towns, any town members, any committees or select boards to really answer any and all questions regarding the pros and cons. And frankly, there are not too many cons, but I certainly won't shy away from any criticism or concerns.
Okay, and Stephen, if folks have questions for you once they get off the call, is the best way to reach you through your website?
Well, yeah, that's certainly true. I do think it'd be wise to if I could ask you to look at the website certainly and look at the materials there, so that any questions that you may have that I could answer easily could be even more easily answered at your own exploration of the website. And then there are links on that website to every town. But that varies what's on those sites. It could be just the town's website with the select board. But yes, I can give you my email address and you can just have at it. It's S, that's because my name's Stephen, and B, that's not because I'm a boy, but because my middle name's Bruce. And the last name is John. So it's SBJOHN at sover.net. That's the Southern Vermont Network, right? SOVER.net, now owned by First Light and whoever else. But that's my email address. And I certainly welcome anybody contacting me from any town in the Windham region or any other town for that matter. I want to recognize especially that we have Reedsboro and Stamford as members who are in fact in Bennington County. And there is also a CUD in Bennington County with 12 towns. We are in communication with them. We've met with their leadership, and it's important that we recognize our neighbors and attempt to collaborate wherever we can as we move forward on this. We have the same goals.
Great. Okay, I think I have one more question here for our technical team, and that is about Starlink. The feasibility study did not consider Starlink a feasible alternative to fiber because of technical immaturity and schedule uncertainty. While now infeasible, Starlink may be in a position to compete with the fiber network in the future. Will the business plan address this competitive risk?
I was betting that we would get that question, so I'm glad we didn't go through the whole meeting with nobody asking that, because we prepared. But the short answer is absolutely. We are anxiously awaiting kind of results of their beta, as I'm sure all of you are. And if it looks like the satellites are overperforming our expectations and everyone else's expectations, that is absolutely a factor that will contribute to the business plan and contribute to our understanding of what the feasible path is moving forward. But yes, so absolutely. And if you sign up for the Elon Musk's beta and find that the internet is great, do let us know. We want to talk to you.
Excellent. Anything else? Anne, did you want to add anything?
No, I just want to, from our CUD's perspective, want to really thank Windham Regional and the team, the research team, for all the work that they've done. These are essential elements to getting us up and operating. First of all, we needed to know if what we were thinking of doing was feasible. We have some good base work that it is, and we now need to roll that into a course of action that allows us to actually go forward and begin to extend some fiber to our unserved areas. And we have lots of them in our territory, as you can see by the slide. That would happen when my mic was okay. I'm going to mute myself. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, and with that, I guess I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I did put a link to the evaluation form in the chat box, but I will also be sending it around to everyone if you didn't get to it tonight. But thank you for participating, and feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions, and we'll try and help get you answers. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.